I know this isn't the most fun way to start off a presentation, but I want you to think about math class. Maybe you were great at math and that's nice. Maybe you were a lot like me and were generally interested but were pretty terrible at math. Either way, I suspect we've all had this experience, where a teacher will show you how to solve an equation the long way before giving you a much shorter way to actually do the solution. Now, I should say that maybe things have changed since I was in math class. I know that since I graduated high school, there's a new thing called Common Core. But math is beautiful because it's the same throughout time. And for me, I always remember that there was a long way to do the equation and a short way to do the equation. Learning the long way generally helps you understand how the math works, how the solution is done. And your teacher probably told you that you can't possibly understand if you only knew the shortcut. And I think a lot of things are like that, right? Even if you know a shortcut for how to get someplace, it's important to know the long way or the important way, the scenic route too. You might need it someday. Well, automation isn't much different from that math class or solving that equation. How do you know what to automate if you don't know your process? Or put a different way, how can you possibly build out the steps to do something automatically if you don't even know what those steps are? How can you find the shortcuts when you don't know the long way or the long cut? Now, as someone who's been podcasting for 8 years, as someone who has had a podcast in the top 5% of all podcasts by download for the last 3 or 4, and as someone who makes about 40% of his income from podcasting, I can tell you the process. I know it by heart. I can teach you the long way, and then I will show you the short way. And by the way, the short way is also the more profitable way, because the short way is the way you save time, is the way you free up your time to work on the important problems. And that's another reason that you should know the long way, because how do you know how much time you're saving if you don't do it the long way first? So in this talk, I'm going to teach you about how you can save a ton of time by automating the guest booking process. And the key here is that you're automating it without making it seem like a robot's doing all the emailing. So let's get started. Before we get into the automation, we need to learn the long way. You need to understand your process. And I should tell you that everyone's process is different. If you have a solo show or you infrequently book guests, that process is going to be different from somebody who books guests every week and only infrequently does a solo show. That process is going to be different from somebody who's doing a short daily podcast. And that process is going to be different from somebody who is doing a show with a co-host. So whatever your process is, you should make checklists. Checklists are super important. Write down everything you need to do to publish a podcast episode from the very beginning to pressing the publish button. You can see with my checklist on the side here that I have a few different sections, right? Like the pre-recording, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing my guest's name correctly. I want to confirm their title, their company, and their topic, and a few other things. Then in post, I want to remind them to stop, save, and send me the recording. I want to stop my recording, and I want to update everything. So once you create your checklists, you want to note which items are easily repeatable. Those are the items that you're likely going to automate. On top of that, you want to note the items that you don't personally have to do. I think this is incredibly important because it will help you free up the time that you need to spend on the more important tasks, getting sponsors maybe, or doing billable work. This is the stuff that either a computer can do or a different person can do. And while we will focus mostly on the computer doing stuff, I will say that I recently hired a VA and she has been extremely helpful with my process. So once you understand your process, that's when you can start evaluating tools to help you. So for example, if you have your guest booking checklist, we'll go through that whole process in a minute. Maybe you want to find a tool like Calendly or another scheduler. Maybe you want to evaluate automation tools like Zapier or IFTTT to see which ones connect up to the tools that you use or the productivity managers that you use. If IFTTT connects to the Amazon Echo in a way that helps you, then you're going to want to look at that. But if Zapier can connect the two tools that you need, you want to go with that. The Elgato Stream Deck is something that I use all the time. I'm actually using it in this talk, but I also use it for my podcast. It helps me create the environment I need. It helps me manage the Zoom call and my recordings in a way that I can do it without interrupting the flow of the conversation. I've also looked at tools like Zencaster and Squadcast to help with the guest recording bit so that maybe they can do less. And I use Airtable. Airtable is a great tool, a database tool that helps you keep things organized, and there's a lot of automation attached to it as well. So those are some of the tools that I use. Yours might be different, but based on the processes that I have in place, these tools have been helpful for me. So let's talk about the guest booking process. The overview of this process is we want to find guests and then do the outreach, right? So we do a little bit of research to see whom we might want to have on the show and then how to reach out for them or to them. We want to book the guests, right, in whatever way, shape, or form we think is best. We want to cover the important communication points. I think one of the biggest mistakes that you can make in podcasting or an interview podcast is having the guest book a time and then never talking to them or never communicating with them until the day you record. You want your guests to be as prepared as possible on the day you record because that's going to make for the best possible interview. And then we will talk about how we can automate this entire process. So first of all, finding guests. I think one of the best things that you can do to find a guest is have a contact form on your podcast's website for people to reach out. Here is my contact form. You can see that when someone selects the reason for contact as want to be a guest, I show them a little note that says, great, I'm always open to guests. I get these requests a lot, so please be sure to answer a few important questions, like why you picked my show. Did you just look at all of the business podcasts or all the technology podcasts and mass email all of them? Because I don't want that. Was there a particular episode you liked and why? That will help me understand what made them think they'd be a good fit for the show. If I interviewed a software developer versus interviewing the former CTO of Facebook, that will help me understand what angle they're coming from and what value they'll be able to provide to my listenership. This is really important. I get a lot of pitches that are like, here's why I'm so great, have me on your show. Also, I just launched this product. If you want to promote your product, I have sponsors that do that. But if you want to share your experience and your story to help my listeners grow their business, that's when I'm going to have you on the show. So this contact form invites a lot of people to reach out, but it also helps me book a lot of guests. And in fact, many of the people I've booked in for the 2021 season have been through this contact form. I haven't had to do as much work as usual because I make my intentions on the form clear up front. And when they write to me and they hit these criteria, if I think they're a good fit, they'll be on the show. There are also several dedicated websites like Podmatch and Podcast Guests and a whole bunch of other ones. I have a resource page for this talk over at podcastliftoff.com/CYE, and I will list some of these services as well as other resources I've mentioned here. But there are several very similar websites out there. There are also Facebook groups, and I don't just mean Facebook groups that connect podcasters with potential guests. If your podcast serves a specific niche or niche, which it should, then you should join Facebook groups that are also in that specific niche, because then you can contribute to that group in a meaningful way and help other people in your niche. But you can also look at the people doing the most interesting things and reach out to them and ask them to be on your podcast. Now, this is really important. Don't just join the group to pick off people for your show. Add value to the group as well so that people know, like, and trust you, and then they'll be more likely to come on your show. This is about forming relationships, but it's a great resource for you to get guests. I also have my virtual assistant find guests, look for guests based on a set of criteria. So when I'm ready to do outreach again, I will sit down and think about the topics I want to cover over the next few months. And then I will give her a list of criteria. She'll populate a spreadsheet. I'll review that information and I'll reach out to the people who I think fit the bill the best. And speaking of, let's talk about outreach. When you reach out to a potential guest, you should state who you are, what you do, and why you want to have that person on the show. Don't make it a generic request. Make it a little personal. And I have a spreadsheet, like I mentioned, and I have that connected to Zapier, which helps me automate this a bit. So kind of the way it works is I fill out the spreadsheet, I mark a row as ready to send, and Zapier creates and sends that email. But the emails are still personal. The emails are still personal because there is a column for personal note. And there is where I will add the information for why I think this person specifically would be a good fit for my show. So most of it is like the important information that they should know about the show. Again, who I am and what I do, what the show is about, and then why I want to have them on the show specifically is a field populated by me. So I spend about 10 minutes filling out this form, and then I have 20 emails out ready to get guests for the show. And the spreadsheet also helps me keep track of who I've reached out to, who has said yes and who has said no. Now, sometimes they'll say maybe later, now's not a good time. Sometimes they'll just straight up say no. But if there's someone that you want on your show, you need to ask. I hear about this a lot. What if the person says no? What if they feel like I'm wasting their time? Then they'll say no, and that's okay, and you can move on. But in most cases, the person you want on your show is probably not going to assume that and reach out. So you should ask them, hey, are you willing to come on the show? I'd really appreciate it. And this has worked really well for me. Yes, people have said no, and that's okay. But early on, Chris Coyer came on my show. This was right when the show launched. He did not need to spend his time coming on an unproven podcast. But he did, and I was really grateful for that. Troy Dean, the same thing. Another well-known person in his space offered up his time within the first 10 or 15 episodes to come on my show and talk to me. More recently, David Sparks, who is well-known in the Apple space, He has several podcasts and he's a lawyer. He didn't need to take time out of his day to come on my show, but he did because I asked and I really appreciate it. We even recorded a behind the scenes or a members only part of the episode where we talked about like Star Wars. So he spent a little extra time with me talking Star Wars for my members. So I really, really appreciated that. But again, if you want somebody on the show, just ask. And you'll probably be surprised by the results because I know I have been. When it comes to booking guests, using a tool like Calendly is clutch because this prevents the back and forth emails and the time zone confusion. And this is where you can lose a lot of time, especially if the time zones are very different. Who wants to go through that dance of, hey, what works for you? Oh, no, that doesn't work for me. What about 2 p.m.? Oh, but it's 2 p.m. Eastern. Oh, no, I'm in Greenwich Mean Time. So a scheduler like Calendly prevents all of that. You send them a link. These are the times that work for me. They're converted to your time zone. Pick the one that works best. And I always include a little note that says, if none of these times work for you, let me know it does. I'm asking you to be on my show, so I'm going to be flexible. But no matter what you use, if it's Calendly or something different, or you still prefer to do the dance, just make sure that the guest gets a calendar invite and then reminders. And reminders, again, Calendly does this, but that's really important because you want to, again, you want that consistent communication with your guest to make sure that they are best prepared for your show. So speaking of, let's talk about those communication points. You're going to want to tell them how to grab a time and how to get that calendar invite, right? So again, if you just send them a Calendly link, that's generated for you. You want to send them information on what to expect on the day of recording and how they can prepare. Maybe you want to send them questions that you've come up with for them, or maybe you just want to tell them the flow of the show. I generally have a page of notes for them about how they can best prepare. You'll want to send a reminder either the day of or the day before. I send them a reminder 24 hours before we record. Between that and the calendar invite, I don't think I really need to send my guests another reminder an hour before. I don't want to flood their inbox, and that reminder plus the calendar invite should be enough. And then you'll want to do any follow-up afterwards. So about an hour after our recording, they'll get an email from me thanking them, asking them for their address so I can send them a thank you note. And it'll tell them where they can upload their audio. I want to make that as easy as possible. And you'll also want to let them know when the show goes live. Again, I think this is really important. Don't tell them they need to share, but let them know in case they want to. I usually say something like, hey, thanks for coming on the show a while back. Your episode's live. Here's the link. If you can share that, I would deeply appreciate it. And not to get off topic a little bit, but I do think that asking them versus telling them they need to share is a big difference. I've been on shows where people have said, you have to rate and review the show. You have to share it. I've been part of events where I've been told I have to share the event with my audience. If a guest is coming on my show, they're already taking time out of my day, or out of their day, rather. They're taking time out of their day to create content that ultimately I'm going to make money off of, between sponsorships or affiliate links or whatever. And they are providing value and they are exerting their expertise. That's why I'm having them on the show. I'm giving them a platform for their message. But I know how valuable time is. So I don't like to ask my guests to do anything they don't have to do. Or I don't like to tell my guests that they need to do anything they don't have to do. So I'll ask them to share it. I'll ask them once. If they want to, great. If they don't, I totally understand, because I don't want them to feel like I'm just using them for their audience either. I'm trying to create good content for my audience. So sorry for that little sidebar, but I think that's really, really important. When I notify them that the episode has gone live, I say, here's the link if you want to share it, no pressure. So we just walked through a lot here. Calendly handles pretty much all of this for me. So here's my guest booking process. A guest grabs a time on Calendly. Then a Zoom call is created and added to a calendar invite. That calendar invite, as well as a confirmation, is sent to the guest. I will also get the calendar invite and the confirmation email so that I know when somebody has booked, and I can see when they have booked, and if for some reason that time doesn't work for me, even though it showed up on Calendly, I can fix it as soon as possible. After the confirmation email is sent, the guest is redirected to my recording notes page. This tells them everything that they need to know about the day we record. There's also a note at the top that says, hey, this is in your email now, and it's included in the calendar invite if you ever need to review it. So I'm telling them everything up front. The guests will get a reminder email 24 hours prior to the recording. That email will also include a link to the recording notes. And they'll get an email after recording thanking them and telling them where to upload the audio. So that's the entire process. Calendly handles it all. Here's what that looks like. So you can see here, I have a 45-minute, 60 days rolling calendar with available recording times. I have the list of questions I want to ask, which includes their job title, their links, their socials. I've got the email reminders set up. So here's the email reminder that they'll get nearly immediately or 24 hours after. I've got the email follow-up. I'm not going to show you that because it has my Dropbox link and I don't want that getting flooded with stuff. And then here's the confirmation redirect page. So that is Calendly. It is hugely helpful for me. And while it covers most of the bases, it doesn't cover everything. There's some stuff I want to do with the information in Calendly that I want to use it outside of Calendly. So for that, I have Zapier. So here's the 4-part Zap for when somebody creates an event on one of my calendar links. So the trigger is somebody books a time on Calendly. The first thing I do is filter that. I've got like 9 different Calendly links, depending on what people want to book. And I only want this process to trigger if it's the how I built it calendar. So that's what I'm looking for in the filter action. If that passes, 2 things happen. A note is created in Evernote with all of the guests' information, as well as the date that we record. And that is because that's where I keep my show notes. My transcriber has access to the show notes. I will jot everything down. A template is created so I can add my questions and any special notes and other things that I might want to ask the guest. And that's where I will take notes during the recording. Then an action for creating a record in Airtable. Airtable is where I build the season schedule. So that's where the sponsors are, that's where the go live dates are, that's where the episode numbers are. So I just plug in the Calendly information into the date that I want the episode to go live, and everything else is there for me. I can take a look at the full schedule without having to kind of cross-reference, oh, who's this guest? Am I spelling their name right? Etc. And then on the day we record, I can reference that to say who's sponsoring. Great, I'll make sure to say those. What's the episode number? I'll make sure to say that. So Zapier plus Calendly does everything for me. And because of this process, once a guest is booked, I don't need to worry about anything except recording with them. So once all of this is done, they'll get the emails they need when they need them. I don't have to worry about it. So they don't suffer because I forgot to email them one day. And I just need to hop on 10 minutes before we record, review the notes that I have in Evernote, and then we get to have a candid conversation that becomes a fantastic podcast episode. So that part is really exciting for me. There are also other helpful automations here, I think, that are worth going over quickly that have to do with stuff outside the booking process. First of all, my post-production process, I hand everything off to my editor. I put everything in Dropbox. He gets an email when an episode is ready for edit. Then he uploads the edited episode for transcription Once he uploads it to the transcripts folder, my transcriber gets an email. And from there, I put it into WordPress. In WordPress, I have a plugin that creates an episode number redirect. So I'll always say something like, for the show notes, go to howibuilt.it/200. And that's where all the show notes will be. It also, this is where the email for the go live happens. As soon as the episode is published, WordPress sends an email to the guest saying that their episode is live. I can use the most improvement to this process here. For example, my VA is fully capable of uploading the episodes, but that's a conversation for another day. The last thing, and this is not an automation as so much as a process improvement, the last thing I would recommend you do is batch your episodes. Before the pandemic and when the pandemic is over and I have a more predictable work schedule, I will go back to recording only on Thursdays, save for exceptions where no Thursday works for the guests I'm asking to be on the show. Only recording on Thursdays helps me stay in the mindset of the podcast so the recordings go smoothly. Then I can batch those episodes and send them to my editor on a Friday. And he usually gets them back to me on a Monday or a Tuesday, and I can then upload those episodes ready for publish, again, in batches. So batching is not an automation technique, but it's definitely a productivity technique that I would strongly recommend. Now, this process has saved me dozens of hours per month. If it takes 4 or 5 minutes per finished minute of a podcast, most of my podcasts are 40 to 50 minutes long. So that's 200 or so minutes per month. And I probably spend about half of that, thanks to my automations. So make a checklist for your process. Find the right tools to automate your processes. Hand off anything you don't need to do directly. And tools that, like Calendly, can do most of the work for you. And I didn't mention this earlier, but most of the work for free. So there's a free tier for Calendly and several of the other schedulers. Check it out. See if it works for you. Thanks so much for attending this talk. My name is Joe Casabona. I'm a podcaster and educator. You can find me on Twitter at jcasabona. And I want to help you launch your podcast. And so as a thank you for attending this talk, I have 2 things for you. One is a freebie and one's a special offer. You can get the freebie over at podcastliftoff.com/CYE. It is your podcast launch framework and podcast episode framework. So it'll have prompts to help you launch your podcast, checklists, and advice for creating the episodes. And if you want to learn even more about podcasting, everything from launching the show to creating consistent content to monetizing your podcast, I have a course called Podcast Liftoff. You can get it for 50% off with the code CYE2020. Much like everybody at this conference, I want you to start your year on the right foot. And if launching a podcast is your goal, this course will help you do that even faster. Thanks so much for attending my talk. I really appreciate it. And until next time, get out there and build something.